The city of Noreth had once stood as the pinnacle of power, a kingdom where justice was swift and unwavering. But now, it was a city in decline. The streets, once filled with life and bustling markets, were empty, barren reminders of a past long gone. Judge Liora stood on the balcony of the judge's tower, staring out over the ruins of her city. Her mind was heavy with the weight of her decisions, but there was no turning back now. "This is the price of justice," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible above the wind. Below, the city was alive with quiet unrest. Her soldiers moved through the streets, their steps purposeful yet cautious. The rebellion had been crushed, but it was only the beginning. The true test was yet to come. "Retribution is coming," Liora murmured, her hand gripping the stone railing tightly. "And no one will escape it." She turned away from the view, her face set with grim determination. The city would burn, but it would be reborn from the ashes, with or without its people's consent. Liora sat in her office late that evening, surrounded by reports from her officers. The light from the flickering candles cast long shadows across the room, but her focus was on the task ahead. "The rebels are gaining ground in the north," Darian, one of her trusted advisors, said, his voice laced with concern. "Their influence is spreading, and it won't be long before they reach the heart of the city." Liora took a deep breath, her mind racing. "Then we must strike first. We cannot afford to wait." Darian frowned, his hands trembling slightly. "Your honor, the people." Liora's sharp gaze interrupted him. "The people must understand that justice is not without sacrifice. If we don't act decisively, the city will fall. We take control of the north, and we break their power." She stood from her desk, her eyes steely. "It's time to act." Darian hesitated, but then nodded in agreement. "I'll prepare the forces." Liora turned to the map of the city, her mind already calculating the strategy. "We don't give them a chance to regroup." The morning after Liora's decision, the city was on edge. Soldiers moved through the streets with purpose, preparing for the assault on the northern districts. Liora, her mind focused on the task at hand, walked through the courtyard of the judge's tower. She was met by Anna, her second-in-command, who had been by her side through the darkest days of their rule. "Are you ready for what's coming?" Anna asked, her voice steady but filled with concern. Liora nodded, her expression firm. "We've given them no choice. They've taken up arms against Noreth. There is no room for hesitation now." Anna looked at her with a mixture of respect and sorrow. "You know this will change everything, right?" Liora stopped and turned to face her. "I'm aware. But the city needs me to lead it back from the brink, Anna. If I hesitate now, we lose everything." Anna nodded in understanding. "Then we fight, together." Liora's face softened for a brief moment, before hardening again. "Then we fight, and we win." As Liora's forces moved into the northern districts, the resistance was fierce. But Liora's strategy was effective. The rebel stronghold was beginning to crumble. "We've broken their front lines," Darian reported, his voice filled with grim satisfaction. "But there's more waiting ahead." Liora stood, her hands resting on the map before her. "Then we push forward," she said. "No more hesitation. We finish this today." The city had been divided for too long, and Liora knew that the rebels would not stop until they had brought Noreth to its knees. "We take their leaders out," she continued, her voice steady, "and we make sure they never rise again." As her officers prepared for the next wave of assault, Liora couldn't help but wonder, was she doing the right thing? Was this truly justice, or was it retribution that would leave a permanent scar on her city? She shook her head. The time for questions was over. Only action remained. By nightfall, the northern districts were in chaos. Fires lit up the streets, and the sounds of battle filled the air. Liora stood at the head of her forces, watching the chaos unfold before her. The city was burning, and she had set the flame. "This is the cost of justice," she whispered to herself. "The price of a city's soul." Anna approached, her face hardened from the battle. "It's over," she said, her voice low. "We've taken control of the north." Liora nodded, her expression unreadable. "But at what cost?" she murmured. How many more lives must be lost before we can finally restore order? Anna stood beside her, her posture firm. We've done what we had to do. Noreth will survive this. Liora's gaze swept over the ruins of the city, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. Survive, yes, but can it ever heal? Anna's silence was answer enough. The aftermath of the northern assault left Noreth in a precarious position. While Liora had secured the area, the rebels had retreated. Their forces scattered, but far from defeated. They'll regroup, Liora said as she stood in the war room, staring at the map of the city. We've dealt them a blow, but they're not finished. This is only the beginning. Darian, standing across from her, nodded. We've pushed them back, but their leaders are still out there. They'll come at us from another angle. Liora's brow furrowed. Then we force their hand. We need to find where they're hiding and strike first. The thought of the next battle hung heavily in her mind, but she couldn't allow herself the luxury of doubt. We take no chances. This city will not fall. Not while I still stand. Anna entered the room, her face drawn from the day's fight. The southern districts are preparing for an uprising, she said, her voice grim. Liora turned to face her. Then we handle it. All of it. By nightfall, the city had descended into chaos once more. News of the rebellion's resurgence spread like wildfire, and the people were afraid. The streets that had been quiet the day before were now filled with whispers and restless movements. Liora stood on the balcony of the Judge's tower, looking out at the city below. This is the calm before the storm, she said softly, her words almost lost in the wind. Anna joined her, her expression weary but determined. The people don't trust you anymore, Anna said bluntly. They don't believe in justice. They only believe in survival. Liora's gaze softened, but her resolve did not waver. I will prove them wrong. I will show them that justice is not a luxury. It's a necessity. She turned toward Anna, her voice firm. Tonight, we strike at the heart of their rebellion. We break their spirit. Anna nodded. I'll ready the troops. Liora took a final look at the city. We end this tonight. Liora's forces moved swiftly through the city, their presence felt but unseen. The element of surprise was their greatest advantage. They made their way toward the heart of the rebel-held southern districts, where the leaders of the uprising were hiding. As they neared the location, Liora's eyes hardened. Tonight we take them all, she said, her voice filled with grim certainty. Darian and Anna flanked her as they led their forces into the darkness. The streets were narrow and winding, the buildings towering above them like silent sentinels. The distant sounds of the rebellion's calls could be heard, but the soldiers pressed forward, unyielding. We strike fast and hard, Liora ordered. No mercy. We need them to understand that justice comes swiftly. As they approached the rebel hideout, Liora's heart beat faster, her hand gripping the hilt of her sword. For Noreth, she whispered. And with that, they moved in. The raid on the rebel hideout was swift and brutal. Soldiers flooded the area, surrounding the building and cutting off any possible escape routes. Liora stood at the forefront, her eyes scanning the surroundings as the sound of battle echoed in the air. They knew we were coming, Darian said, his voice tight with tension. They're dug in deep. Liora's gaze never wavered. Then we root them out, she said simply. We don't leave anyone standing. As her forces breached the rebel hideout, a fierce firefight broke out. Arrows flew, swords clashed, and the sound of steel on steel filled the air. Liora pushed forward, cutting down any who stood in her way. The rebels fought hard, but they were unprepared for the sheer ferocity of Liora's forces. This ends tonight, Liora muttered under her breath as she continued to fight, her determination unwavering. She could feel the city's future hanging in the balance, and she was not about to let it slip through her fingers. By the time the battle ended, the southern districts had been reclaimed, but the cost was high. Liora stood over the battlefield, the fallen rebels scattered across the ground. The city was silent, save for the distant sounds of victory cries from her forces. But in her heart, she felt nothing but emptiness. We've won, Darian said, his voice rough. but it doesn't feel like victory. Liora looked out over the carnage, her face unreadable. Victory comes at a price, she said softly. And this city has paid too much. Anna approached, her expression grim. You did what had to be done, she said, her voice calm but filled with the weight of the moment. Liora didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked at the horizon, the sun beginning to rise in the distance. I hope it was enough, she whispered. The city was still in her hands, but the question lingered in her mind. What price would she pay to keep it? The city of Noreth was slowly recovering from the brutal battles that had ravaged it. Yet, despite the victory in the southern districts, the heart of the rebellion still throbbed in the shadows. Liora stood in the command room, examining the latest reports. They've regrouped faster than we anticipated, Darian reported, his voice tight with frustration. There are signs of another uprising in the eastern quarter. Liora clenched her jaw. We cannot afford another conflict, Darian. This must end. We need to cut the head off the snake. Anna, who had been standing silently in the corner, stepped forward. You know they're not just fighting for power. They believe they're fighting for justice. Liora's eyes hardened. Then they are mistaken. Justice is not a rebellion, and it is not a war. It is an order, and it will be restored. She turned to Darian. Prepare the troops. We march at dawn. Darian nodded, but his expression was filled with doubt. Are we sure they'll surrender this time, Your Honor? Liora's gaze was resolute. They'll have no choice. By morning, Liora's forces had gathered at the eastern quarter of the city, the heart of the latest uprising. The streets were lined with barricades, and the smell of smoke filled the air. Liora, clad in her armor, stood at the front of her troops, her gaze fixed on the opposition. This is the final stand, she said, her voice cold. We either break them here or lose Noreth forever. Anna, standing beside her, placed a hand on her shoulder. You've done everything, Liora. The people will see the cost of your leadership. Liora nodded but said nothing. The sound of distant shouting reached their ears as the rebels prepared for the assault. We move in 5, Liora commanded, her tone decisive. The soldiers around her were silent, their faces grim but determined. They knew what was at stake. As the troops advanced, Liora could feel the weight of her actions pressing down on her. This will be the last fight, she whispered to herself. For Noreth. The battle erupted quickly, and the streets of the eastern quarter became a war zone. The rebels fought fiercely, but Liora's forces were well trained and ready. Push forward, Liora shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Her sword flashed as she cut down one of the rebel fighters, her eyes scanning the battlefield. Anna was at her side, taking down rebels with swift precision. They're faltering, Anna said, her breath heavy. Keep pressing, Liora responded. We don't stop until they've surrendered. The city was shaking with the violence of the fight, but Liora couldn't afford to let up. She had seen the consequences of hesitation before. As the last of the rebels began to retreat, Liora stood in the middle of the battlefield, watching the retreating figures. This isn't over, she muttered under her breath. It will never be over. She turned to Anna. We need to root out the last of them. The city cannot rest until justice is served. As the battle subsided, Liora stood over the field, surveying the aftermath. Her soldiers had triumphed, but the cost was high. The eastern quarter was in ruins, and the city's blood had soaked into its streets. How many more, Anna? Liora asked quietly, her voice filled with sorrow. Anna stood beside her, her expression grim. This was necessary, Liora. You knew what had to be done. Liora turned to face her, her eyes filled with a mixture of weariness and resolve. How many more will have to die before we can call this city our own again? Before we can say that justice has been served? Anna didn't answer right away. It won't be easy, she said finally, but it will be worth it. Liora's gaze softened as she looked at the destruction around them. I hope so, she whispered. She turned back to her soldiers. We rebuild, we push forward, this war is far from over. The following days were filled with the work of cleaning up the wreckage and restoring order. The city had been saved, but at a great cost. Liora found herself in the council chambers, facing the remaining members of the ruling body. "We have done what was necessary," Liora said, her voice steady but strained. "But the people are weary. The city is broken. We need to rebuild, but I cannot do this alone." One of the council members, a seasoned politician, leaned forward. "What do you ask of us, Judge Liora?" Liora's gaze hardened. "I ask you to give the people something to believe in again. We will rebuild Noreth, but not just with bricks and mortar. We will rebuild trust, and we will restore justice." The room was silent, and for the first time in months, there was a glimmer of hope in the air. "Then we stand with you," the council member said. Liora nodded, her expression resolute. "Then let us begin." In the weeks following the battle, Noreth began to take tentative steps toward recovery, but the shadows of the rebellion still loomed, and the scars of the past were not easily erased. Liora stood at the edge of the council chamber, staring out at the city as her thoughts raced. The people had seen the violence, the destruction, and the bloodshed. Could they ever trust her again? "You did what was necessary." Anna's voice broke through Liora's thoughts. She turned to see her second-in-command standing at the door, her expression unreadable. "We've made progress," Liora said quietly, "but the people are still wary. They're not sure who I am anymore, and I don't blame them." Anna stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "You led them through the storm, Liora. Now you must show them that Noreth's future is worth fighting for." Liora's eyes hardened. "And if I fail?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Anna placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then we stand together, and we fight again." The following day, Liora addressed the people from the steps of the judge's tower, her face calm, but filled with the weight of what was to come. "We stand at a crossroads," she began, her voice carrying across the crowd. "Our city has been tested and we have survived, but we must now prove that we are more than the sum of our battles. We must rebuild not only our city, but our trust in one another. Justice is not about punishment. It is about ensuring that every citizen has a voice." The crowd fell silent, watching her intently. "I know you have doubts," Liora continued, "but I will not stop until Noreth is whole again. We move forward together, or not at all." As she finished her speech, Liora noticed the cautious glimmers of hope in the faces of the people, but also the skepticism. Would they truly believe in her promise of healing, or would they turn away in fear once again? The next few days were filled with difficult decisions and tense negotiations. Liora had promised the people change, but the question was whether she could deliver. She met with the heads of the remaining factions within the city, hoping to forge a new path forward. But the council was divided, and the discussions quickly became heated. "You cannot expect us to simply forget the bloodshed," one of the council members, Lord Marcellus, said, his voice sharp. "There are those who will never accept your rule, Judge Liora. There will always be those who see you as a tyrant." Liora stood at the head of the table, her expression steady. "And those people will not be silenced, but I will not rule through fear. This city will be governed by law, not by bloodshed. We rebuild with justice, or we do not rebuild at all." The room was filled with silence as the weight of her words hung in the air. Could she truly unite a city so torn apart? The days following the council meeting were filled with unrest. Rebel factions continued to stir in the shadows, and whispers of another uprising began to surface. Liora knew that time was running out. She gathered her most trusted officers, including Anna and Darian, to strategize. "We can't afford another failure," Liora said, her voice tense. "If we don't act decisively, the city will fall into chaos again. We need to root out these pockets of rebellion before they grow any stronger." Darian looked concerned. "If we push too hard, we risk alienating the people. They're already divided." Liora's gaze was unwavering. "Then we show them that we are strong, but we are also just. We give them a choice: support the future of Noreth or be left behind." Anna nodded. "I'll ready the troops." Liora turned to the map spread out before them, the lines of rebellion marked in red. "We strike tonight." By the time night fell, Liora's forces had mobilized, moving through the city with precision. The rebel strongholds were no longer hidden. They had become a blight on Noreth's streets, and it was time to eradicate them. Liora stood at the front of her troops, her eyes scanning the darkened streets as they marched toward the enemy. "We end this tonight," she said quietly, her voice filled with cold determination. Anna walked beside her, her face grim. "The people are watching, Liora," Anna said softly. "What if they think we're just another army, fighting for power?" Liora's gaze was fixed ahead, unwavering. "Then they will see that we fight for them. We fight for the future of this city, not for our own gain." As they reached the first rebel stronghold, Liora raised her hand to signal the attack. "For Noreth," she whispered. And with that, the final battle for the city began. The city had barely begun to heal from the chaos of the past few weeks, but Liora knew that the real battle was only just beginning. The attack on the rebel stronghold had been successful, but the victory felt hollow. Liora stood alone in her chambers, staring at the city below. How many more must suffer? She asked herself, her voice barely a whisper. Anna entered the room, her face tired but steady. "We've taken control of the city, Liora," Anna said. "But you're right. The work is far from over." Liora turned to face her, her eyes heavy with the weight of their recent battles. "How do we rebuild when trust is shattered?" she asked. "How do we lead when the people fear us?" Anna placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've done more than anyone could have expected. But now you have to show them the way forward. They need to see the light after the darkness." Liora nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then we build, one step at a time." The days following the assault were filled with tense negotiations and attempts to restore order. Liora knew that the rebellion's defeat was not the end. It was merely the first chapter in a long and difficult journey. The council convened to discuss the future of Noreth. As Liora sat at the head of the table, the members of the council exchanged nervous glances. "The city is divided," Lord Marcellus said, his voice filled with concern. "There are factions who refuse to accept your rule, Judge Liora. They'll never accept the changes you're pushing." Liora's gaze remained steady. "Then we show them that change is inevitable," she said firmly. "Noreth will not return to the old ways. Justice will not be a privilege for the few, but a right for all." The council members exchanged uneasy looks, but none spoke against her. Liora stood, her voice carrying across the room. "We begin with the people, we give them hope, and we give them the justice they deserve." Liora's plan to rebuild Noreth began with the people. She initiated public forums, where citizens could voice their grievances, their hopes, and their fears. At the first forum, the tension in the air was palpable as the people gathered in the square. "I know that many of you do not trust me," Liora began, her voice carrying across the square. "And I do not ask for your trust. I ask for your cooperation, for your willingness to rebuild with me, not against me." The crowd was silent, watching her closely. "We will restore the city, together. We will build a Noreth where justice is not just a word, but a reality. But this will take time. It will take all of us." As Liora finished speaking, she saw the skeptical faces in the crowd, but she also saw something more, a glimmer of hope, the smallest sign that perhaps, after everything, they were willing to believe in the future. Days passed, and slowly, the people of Noreth began to show signs of reconciliation. The streets, though still marked by the scars of war, began to fill with life once more. Liora walked through the marketplace, her eyes scanning the faces of the citizens. There was a wariness in their eyes, but also a hint of something new, cautious optimism. "They are watching you," Anna said, walking beside her. "They want to believe that Noreth can rise from the ashes, but they're not sure if they can trust you yet." Liora's gaze remained steady as she looked at the people. "Trust is earned," she said quietly. "But I will show them that I am here to rebuild, not to rule." Anna gave her a sideways glance. "You've come a long way, Liora, but it's still just the beginning." Liora nodded. "Then we start with them. We show them that we are a city of justice, and we build from the ground up." The days turned to weeks, and Noreth began to heal, but the road ahead was still uncertain. One evening, As Liora stood alone in her chambers, looking out at the city, a feeling of doubt crept into her heart. The city was breathing again. But what if it wasn't enough? What if the cracks ran deeper than she realized? It's never going to be easy, is it? Anna's voice broke through her thoughts. Liora turned to see Anna standing in the doorway. "No," Liora replied, her voice quiet but filled with resolve. "But it's the only way forward." Anna stepped into the room, her face filled with quiet understanding. "And you won't do it alone." Liora looked at her, her gaze softening. "I couldn't, not without you." Anna smiled faintly. "Then we keep moving forward, together." Liora nodded, a sense of calm settling over her. Together. The rebuilding of Noreth continued, but Liora's sense of peace remained elusive. The cracks in the city's foundation were deeper than she had anticipated, and the people, though gradually accepting her rule, were not easily swayed. She walked through the streets of the city, observing the rebuilding efforts. The marketplace was more crowded than before, and the sounds of trade and laughter filled the air. But there was an underlying tension that could not be ignored. "They're still watching you," Anna said, falling in step beside her, "waiting to see if you'll truly change things." Liora nodded, her expression weary. "I know. I've shown them justice, but justice is not enough. They need to see that we are stronger together, that we can trust each other again." Anna looked at her, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "And they will, but it's a long road." Liora glanced around at the people who had once been her enemies. "Then we walk it together." Liora's attempt to restore peace in Noreth was met with varying success. Some of the more radical rebel factions remained loyal to their cause, and their resistance would not be easily extinguished. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Liora sat in the war room, looking over the latest intelligence reports. "They're planning something," Darian said, his voice grim. "The rebels are regrouping again. They're not finished yet." Liora's brow furrowed. "How long until they strike?" Darian shook his head. "We don't know. But they're moving faster than expected. We need to act before they grow too strong." Liora clenched her fists, her eyes narrowed. "We can't allow this to go on. I won't let Noreth fall again." Anna entered the room, her face weary but resolute. "Then we prepare. We strike first, and we take the fight to them." Liora stood, her posture straight and commanding. "Prepare the forces. We end this now." The following night, Liora's forces moved through the city's outskirts, preparing to intercept the rebel faction before they could regroup. "We strike fast and hard," Liora said, her voice low and steady as she addressed her officers. "We give them no time to prepare." Anna, standing at her side, looked out at the horizon, where the last rays of the sun were fading. "Do we have the support of the people?" she asked quietly. Liora's eyes met hers. "Not all of them," she admitted, "but the ones who matter do." As they marched deeper into enemy territory, the sounds of distant movement reached their ears. "They're close," Liora whispered. "Tonight we end their threat once and for all." The soldiers behind her tensed, ready for what was to come. Liora's hand rested on the hilt of her sword. "For Noreth," she said, her voice firm, "and for justice." The ambush was swift and brutal. The rebels had set traps along the path, but Liora's forces were well prepared. "Push forward," Liora shouted as she charged into the heart of the enemy camp, her sword cutting through the darkness. The rebels had nowhere to run, and the fight turned into a chaotic melee. Liora fought with the precision and power of someone who had seen too many battles, her sword a blur in the night. "They're retreating," Darian shouted as the rebels began to scatter. But Liora didn't stop. "We don't let them regroup," she ordered. "Chase them down." The soldiers pushed forward, capturing stragglers and cutting down those who tried to flee. In the midst of the fight, Liora's mind raced. "How many more will we have to fight?" she thought. "How long can we keep this up?" But for now, there was only the fight, and the need to ensure that Noreth remained standing. The battle was over, but the cost was evident. The rebel faction had been shattered, their leaders captured or killed, but Noreth's streets were stained with blood. As Liora stood among the fallen, her heart heavy, Anna approached her. "We've won," Anna said, her voice quiet. "But it doesn't feel like victory." Liora turned to her, her eyes filled with the weight of the decision. "It never feels like victory, Anna," she replied. "Only survival." They stood in silence for a long moment, watching as their soldiers cleaned up the battlefield. "What now?" Anna asked. Liora's gaze remained fixed on the horizon, where the first light of dawn was beginning to break. "Now we rebuild," she said softly. "We rebuild Noreth, and we rebuild the trust of its people, and we do it together." With the final remnants of the rebellion extinguished, Noreth was at a crossroads. The city had endured its darkest days, but the scars were deep. The people, though beginning to rebuild, still harbored a quiet distrust of their rulers. Liora stood once again in the heart of the judge's tower, staring out over the city. The skyline was dotted with cranes and scaffolding, signs of life returning to the ruins. "This city will never be the same," she murmured, her voice filled with a mix of sorrow and resolve. Anna approached, her face steady but tired. "You've done more than most thought possible," she said softly. "But the real work is just beginning." Liora nodded, her gaze still locked on the distant horizon. "I've promised the people justice. But I know now that justice is not enough. I have to show them that we can truly heal, that we can move forward together." Anna stood beside her, looking out over the city. "And you will," she said quietly. "One step at a time." The people of Noreth gathered once more in the central square, their faces weary but hopeful. Liora addressed them from the same steps where she had first called for justice. "We've fought for our city," she began, her voice strong yet filled with humility. "But now, it is time to rebuild the heart of Noreth, its people." The crowd was silent, listening intently. "I know that many of you doubt me. I know that I have not earned your trust. But I will spend the rest of my life earning it. We will restore justice, not just in the courts, but in the hearts of every citizen." The crowd shifted, a mixture of skepticism and cautious optimism in their eyes. "The past cannot be undone," Liora continued, "but we have the power to shape the future. We will build a city where no one lives in fear, where justice is the foundation upon which we stand." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, but it was clear that many were still hesitant to believe. Liora's gaze swept over the sea of faces. "Together we rise." Liora's speech echoed through the streets of Noreth, and while some remained wary, others began to rally behind her. The next day, she walked through the rebuilt marketplace, watching the vendors set up their stalls once more. The city had come alive again, but there was still a palpable tension in the air. As she passed by, people watched her closely, some nodding in acknowledgement, others turning away. "It's a start," Anna said, walking alongside her. "But the real work is in the small acts, showing them that you can be the leader they need, not just the one they were forced to accept." Liora nodded, her face thoughtful. "It's not enough to promise change. I need to show them every day that we are building something better." Anna smiled faintly. "And you will, one act of kindness at a time." Liora stopped in front of a vendor and smiled warmly at the old man behind the stall. "Good morning, sir," she said, her voice genuine. The vendor smiled back, the first real smile Liora had seen in days. "Good morning, Your Honor." It was small, but it was a start. As the weeks passed, Noreth began to flourish once again. The scars of war were slowly fading, replaced by the steady rhythm of rebuilding. Liora stood in front of the newly rebuilt courthouse, watching as people from all walks of life entered and exited, their voices filled with quiet confidence. But the weight of her decisions was never far from her mind. "We've come so far, Anna," Liora said quietly, her gaze fixed on the courthouse doors. "But I can't help wondering if we've truly changed anything." Anna stood beside her, her expression thoughtful. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she said. "You've built a foundation, and now it's up to the people to decide what they do with it." Liora nodded slowly. Then we give them the tools to rebuild. We show them that they have a role in this city, that their voices matter. Anna smiled faintly. And you'll show them that, every day. Liora turned toward her. Together, we'll make sure they never forget. The months that followed were a testament to the strength of Noreth's people. While the scars of the past remained, the city was no longer defined by its wounds. Liora stood once more before the steps of the Judge's Tower, addressing the people of Noreth. Today, we stand not as rulers and subjects, but as equals, she said, her voice filled with conviction. We have rebuilt our city, but it is not the bricks and mortar that define us. It is our unity, our shared strength, and our unwavering belief in justice. The crowd stood silent, listening intently. I promised you justice, and I will continue to deliver it. But we must also continue to rebuild the trust that was broken. Noreth's future is not just in my hands, but in all of ours. As Liora finished, a deep sense of connection filled the square. The people were no longer afraid. They were no longer divided. They were one city, one future. And it was only just beginning.